Hello and welcome to I Missed Book Club. I'm your host, Veronica Reynolds, and this week I have a brand new co-host, Joe Barbieri, who is our local history librarian. Joe has been with us for several years. He is got a great background in the history of Rockland County, where our library is. I know some of you listening aren't from our local area, but this is a very local topic that we're going to cover today, and I'm really excited to talk about it. So hello, Joe.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks for having me on today.
I realized I didn't warn you, but one of the questions I like to ask all my co-hosts, so you get to come up with this on the spot, is what is a book that made you?
Oh, okay. I've talked about this one before. My doorway is setting in place for sure. Book that made me, Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury.
Yeah.
It's this summertime tale, kind of coming of age story, and it's all these little vignettes, mostly centered around this 12-year-old kid, Douglas Spalding. He's growing up in this small town in Illinois, and it's kind of following him through the summer. And like I said, it's coming of age story, kind of realizing, growing up, realizing what's important in life, and it's very lighthearted sometimes. But it can be also very, it can be very dark at points too. But a really great summertime read, very nostalgic too. You really feel like you're there in this little town in the Midwest.
And I feel like that's such a perfect book to lead into this, because when we talk about nostalgia and growing up, this is how we came up with the topic, because Joe and I are both Rockland natives. We were both born in Rockland County, and we both grew up pretty close to a town called Nyack, which, even if you're not from the area, you may have heard of Nyack. It's not a very big town, but it's very influential. It's a river town. And a part of Nyack, although it stands apart on its own, depending on what time in history you're talking about, was Grandview on the Hudson, which is a gorgeous neighborhood of very large, beautiful homes that are built up into the mountainside overlooking the Hudson River. And if you grew up near or around Nyack or any of the river towns on the Hudson River, it's a very distinct style of home. It's a very distinct feeling of these towns. They tend to have a lot of antique stores and small businesses, and they can feel a little bit like stepping back in time because they're very well preserved, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. You definitely have the old 19th century houses with the brackets, and the turrets and towers and things. Our house today is also kind of very, very classic and old, but in a little bit of a different way.
So if you grew up in this area, you may have driven by the house that we're talking about. And because it's a podcast, obviously owned by writers and illustrators, which is why we're concerned about it. But it was such a magical home that as a kid, if you drove by it, I don't know how you would not be taken by it. It was a gorgeous storybook home. And its a most amazing feature was that it was built pretty much right into the rock face, it looked like. And all the way down the rock face of the mountain, they had fountains and waterfalls and wells. And as a kid, I had no idea why it was like that. But I knew that it was very beautiful and very magical. And it was so cool to have a house in our area that was like magic, right?
Yeah, it was it was exactly that. It was magic. And my dentist was in South Nyack. So I grew up in Blauvelt on the other side of the big mountain, Clausland Mountain, that kind of lines the Hudson in this area. And I probably saw it coming back to Blauvelt on the way back from the dentist. It's probably when I saw it as a kid. And yeah, it's this sandstone house that was actually built, and I mean literally built, by these two artists and their friends. So our subjects today, we'll finally come to them, are Berta and Elmer Hader. And they bought the property on the side of the hill in Grandview in 1921, and they began working on this house in 1922. And like I said, when I mean working, I mean literally they're laying stone foundations. They have their friends coming over to help install these ceiling beams that are going to support the roof. This is literally these artists working with their hands.
Yes, I mean that I was reading, I didn't realize they had hand built the house, which was truly incredible. So before we dive into their works, I love to pull a quote if you
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm
Go
a
ahead.
big fan of that. And when I was looking for more information about them, you lent me a wonderful book, Berta and Elmer Hader, A Lifetime of Art, which I really recommend. Gorgeous book that really shows a lot of their artwork. But I also found that the LIU Post, which is a college, has a special collection of Berta and Elmer Hader books. They are intentionally collecting first editions of all of their books. And there's a really lovely little introduction to them on their website. But I just thought I would read the very last line of this from the curator, Jaron L. Jewell. In examining the life work of Berta and Elmer Hader, we learn to stop and question the importance of valuing juvenile authors who transcend time.
Wow, that is really
Right?
great because they are these authors, and the stories really could they applied in the 30s and 40s when they were writing the majority of these things, and a lot of them are timeless enough where they still you could read them to children today and they still make perfectly sense. The message is still there. The artwork is still great and fabulous. So yeah, that's a perfect quote, I think.
Thanks. And I just wanted to pull the fact just so we can do the dry details. They are multiple Caldecott winners, which if you
Oh
don't
yeah, yep.
as a listener is one of the top prizes for children's literature. They illustrated and wrote many books. Some of them they wrote themselves, some of them they illustrated for other people. So in total, they worked on 70 children's books, which is an incredible span of a career. But aside from that, they were also just known as environmentalists and very kind neighbors, and they have a lot of accolades. So Joe is going to tell the bulk of this story, and I will ask nosy questions as we poke through. So I don't know, did you want to start right at the beginning, Joe, with their separate childhoods, or
Yeah,
dive in a little later?
yeah. We'll start with their separate lives here. So we'll start first with Berta. Berta Horner is born in San Pedro, Mexico in 1891. And her family was there down in Mexico as part of a business venture. I'm not sure what kind of operation this was, but they move back to the US. And I think her family was originally from Texas, or sort of the Southwest there. They moved to Texas in 1893. And then her father passes away in 1895. They do a lot of moving around in her young life. And actually, they're pretty local for a time. Her mother Adelaide and younger brother Godfrey, and Berta, they moved to Kansas City after the father dies, and after that they move up to Suffern in Rockland County, where her grandparents live. And her grandfather is William Jennings, and he's a broker in New York City. That's
No relation to Brian Jennings, right?
Yeah.
Head of Adult Services.
Yeah, and not that we know of.
Okay.
So he's up there in Suffern, and they call him this broker in this one old newspaper article I found back in the 1930s. So I kind of think the family has money there. Adelaide, her mother, she works as a social worker, so they're not completely set for life, but you'll see why. I kind of have a feeling there was some money around.
Mm-hmm.
Berta spends her early school years in Suffern, and then she attends the Ethical Culture School in New York City. This is a private school, so that's why you kind of get the very, very humanistic, and that's why you kind of get the feeling that there's maybe a little bit of money there.
Right.
Berta is always interested in art, and her mother and grandmother were amateur artists, and they encourage her. When she's around 9 or 10, they send her for art lessons, and I think it was they sent her to this artist studio to kind of help out, an apprentice almost, and observe and get lessons along the way too. But they're on the move again. When Berta's in high school, they move to Cleveland, Ohio. She graduates from high school there. And that's where Adelaide meets her second husband, and his name is William Gordon. And then in 1909, they move to the West Coast to Seattle.
Goodness.
Yeah, lots of moving around.
You get a lot of mileage on her feet there.
Yeah. On the West Coast, Berta enrolls in the University of Washington School of Journalism. She gets a part-time job engraving and typesetting, and gets this eye for design because this is still manual layout, right? You have
Right.
to,
Right. When you're literally typesetting, right? You're pulling individual. I love fonts. I'm obsessed with that whole experience.
yeah, and this is when it was still all done by hand, and any graphic work, you're actually laying out the pieces and doing little clippings and making the mock-ups by hand, right?
Yeah.
We're a
For those
long way.
who don't know, if you're in a Word document and you're copying and pasting, that's because people used to literally cut, copy, and paste things together. In fact, when we moved our library over, one of the things that we finally got rid of is we had all these cool like slide rulers and stuff because we were used to literally have to lay out the newsletter. So there
Yeah,
were
yeah,
my office that were left over from when we physically laid out the newsletter.
yeah. This is how it was done back in the day, and we're a long way from basically all those graphic design programs that we have nowadays. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so she gets gigs doing fashion drawings and doing advertisements for companies and newspapers. So she really gets this eye for design.
And not to
Um,
interrupt again, but that is where we get the term fashion plate from. When you hear someone talk about someone being a fashion plate, it's because when they did those fashion designs, they had to plate those out as well for publication.
yeah, so definitely this eye for design and layout. In 1915, her friend encourages her to move to San Francisco and work at the San Francisco Bulletin, the big paper out there. So she makes the move and she enrolls in the California School of Design. And she kind of falls in with this group of artsy people, and they all, they're all living together, and they rent a place on Telegraph Hill, which overlooks the San Francisco Bay. So a little bit of foreshadowing of what kind of scenery Berta appreciates, right? We're looking out into a nice, pretty body of water. So, that'll come up a little bit later.
Right, that's relevant.
um, while she's there on Telegraph Hill, she gets this first taste of doing children's art. She makes little small sketches for the kids who are around. It's still a port neighborhood. There are lots of little kids running around, families, and the kids need to keep busy, so she'll paint them these little sketches. And sometimes the children and their parents are even subjects for portraits. Her friends described her as being quiet but friendly and still outgoing. And then she doesn't always have to be the center of attention, but she's there and the supportive, quiet friend, and she's very loyal to those friends that she makes. And we'll kind of see that play into the story a little bit later. As we know, they had this dedicated group of friends who came and helped them build their house later on. Now that we have Berta settled in Telegraph Hill, we'll do the other side of the tandem.
Yeah. Pause
Yeah.
on to Elmar.
Yeah, on to Elmer. So Elmer, he's originally from the West Coast. He's born in Pajaro, California. That's kind of south of where San Francisco and San Jose is.
They
In
both
1899.
moved here. Like this was a choice that they made to both live in this area. I find that really fascinating.
Yeah.
There was nothing here. Like just to be clear, like where we live is quite built up now. But even when I was a kid, it was still it was suburban, but like verging on rural.
Yeah, definitely still the country when compared to New York City. Not quite the modern suburbs that we know right now.
No, certainly when they moved here, it would have been mostly farmland.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. So Elmer, he's born in 1899, and his family moves a few years after that to San Francisco. Pretty massively impacted. Well, everyone was, because in 1906, San Francisco is hit by the huge earthquake.
Right.
And this does a couple things, this does a couple things to his young life. He wants to enroll in the California School of Design, but that got hit by the earthquake like everything else in town, and they're rebuilding it. So he takes this job as a fireman on a train. And basically what you're doing is you are shoveling the coal into the burner and operating the boiler and all that. And that's on this line that runs between the ports, so they can and the warehouses, right? So you're running this train line between the docks and the warehouses. So all the things that are shipped into San Francisco, they can be transported by train to the to the warehouses. And I think he gets that job through his father, because his father has some kind of job with the train company that had done that. So he took that job at 17. He can't he's just finished up high school, but there's this massive earthquake that, just had this perfect timing, and he can't enroll at the California School of Design yet because he's kind of always been interested in the arts as well. He saves up enough money while he's doing this. After a few months, the California School of Design, they rebuild enough where they can start classes again. And he does well there, and he starts winning scholarships to help fund his tuition. That initial tuition that he paid, that he earned from working on the railroad, was the only time he ever had to pay tuition. The rest of the time, he's good enough where he can keep on winning scholarships.
Must be nice.
Yeah.
I guess it's before the age of college debt, right? I mean, that probably wasn't that typical yet anyway, but I wonder if they would even let you borrow back then, or if you just had to pay as you went. I bet you had to pay as you went, because credit was not as big of a thing as it is now.
I'd imagine that, yeah. So he is very lucky that he could just keep on winning these scholarships. So eventually, he and his friend, Ed Hull, they win a big scholarship to study at the Académie Julienne in Paris.
Oh, to France, as we know,
yeah.
Artist wants to go.
Yeah, so this is the early 1900s. Paris is still very much has that big cachet as the center of the modern art world, right?
Sure. Cafes, Sartre, all of that good stuff.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So the problem is they have their tuition paid for from this scholarship, but they don't have money for travel or room and board. So, they if they could go right there, well, they can't travel. They would have nowhere to stay, or, no money for food or anything. So what they do is they say, okay, well, we'll put our heads together and we'll come up with a way to come up with some money. And what they do is they form this vaudeville act. And it's not...
Of course, that's why we're too.
Yeah, right? What
that was my first thought. Like, join the circus. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not... It's part of... Eventually, they join kind of a bigger traveling troupe, but it's not like the typical vaudeville of, we think of someone up there on stage with...
Tell me they literally joined the circus. I was joking.
That's what happens down the line. They do this. It's not this typical, we're going to do jokes or some slapstick comedy up on the stage with wearing our derby hats, right? It's kind of this oddity because they're artists. They put their own spin on it. They cover themselves in powder, and they make these plaster props up, and they pose in these poses and they replicate the ancient famous statues, right? So when you see these Greek and Roman statues, they recreate those.
So this was like a thing, though, because if you've ever read Little Women, they talk about tableaus a lot. And these were really popular, where like a bunch of people, they would come up with them on like picnics and stuff. And rather than like act out a full scene, because maybe not everyone in your party could act, you would kind of like have almost like a miniature mime show, but it would be like what we would consider now like a GIF, practically, just kind of like a slightly moving picture where you would like everyone put on costumes and they would pose, and they called them tableaus. They were really popular. So that's very funny that they were kind of reinventing the tableau, basically.
Yeah, and this is what they do. And eventually they join a bigger acting group that starts touring around the country. And while they're doing this, classical statue emulation act, they also have this like a side act on the side, because they're both artists, and they call it Sketch a Minute. And this is basically sketching improv comedy. The audience, they call out a subject or a situation, and Elmer and Ed, they sketch it really fast, very quickly. And this is kind of a novelty, right? Well, sure. I mean, both of these, all these things are
I think
kind
I'd want to watch that now. That sounds fun.
Yeah, and they did well enough with this act because by 1911 they're in Paris, and they're touring. They're seeing the classical works in the museums there, drawing and painting, and they're moving into they're learning all the techniques and this impressionistic style that's hasn't quite come to America yet, but is the big thing that's going on there. So Elmer comes back from Europe in 1914. So just before World War I, things are not looking too great there. So he's just left right in time, and he moves back to his parents, who are now in the San Francisco Mission District, and he starts painting all around the city. He's out there every day with his easel and his box of paints and his brushes. One of his favorite places is on Telegraph Hill, because you're looking out onto this nice body of water. There's lots of everyday scenery to paint there, right? There are docks. There's, you.
I noticed in the book you lent me that he paints boats a lot. He seems to really like boats.
Yeah. So right there in the bay, you have this beautiful sea, landscape and seascape surrounding it. All these great boats, docks, perfect subject for landscape, right?
Right.
Eventually, he gets tired of dragging his easel around and these paints and all his supplies. And one of these artist people say they know this nice fellow artist who lives nearby who might be able to let him store his supplies at her place, which is right on Telegraph Hill. So in 1916, with art supplies in hand, he knocks on the door of Berta Horner. And they become fast friends. This is not surprising. They're both interested in art. They travel in kind of these overlapping circles of friends. It seems like somebody said, "Oh, hey, do you know Berta up there on
Telegraph Hill?" It's kind of inevitable that they would have met, basically. Like they were going to collide eventually, right?
Yeah. They spend a little bit of time together, but of course, the U.S. enters World War I in 1917. Elmer is drafted, and because he has these artistic abilities and he's pretty good at speaking French, he's drafted as a camouflager. And basically, that's you're using your artist skills to mask these army encampments and military bases. So it's a lot of play with color and texture so that these things aren't visible from either, across the field or above from the air.
Can I tell you a unrelated, but I find hysterical story that I'd never heard about?
Sure.
Related. Sorry I'm really devolving us today, but I just read this and it just cracked me up. Apparently during World War II, there's always these divisions of artists, and the division that did this in World War II, same thing, lots of artists. They did incredible mimicry work, and the Germans had picked up on this. And they decided they were going to build an entire fake camp to, as an intimidation tactic. But the problem was the Americans and other, Allied powers found out about it pretty early on. But they let them keep building it because they figured, well, wait, let them waste their energy. It's not doing anything. We'll let them waste their time. And the day they finished it, they dropped a wooden bomb on them. So
that's a good story.
Anyway, I just really tickled me.
Yeah, so we've always had these kind of artists at work doing these deceptive ruses basically during these wars, and Elmer was one of them. So the two continue to write and keep in correspondence while Elmer's overseas. And Berta follows one of her friends, Bessie Beatty, that's a good name for you, right?
I like that.
Into the publishing world, because Bessie was an editor at McCall's magazine. But this is based in New York, or at least Bessie is. So they moved down to Greenwich Village together. So again, another very artist community in a very, they're there again with this circle of friends. Some of them move out from California to be there. But again, always, in these circles with these fellow artists. So 1919 is a very important year for the couple. Through their connection with Bessie at McCall's, Berta is able to secure an illustrating job there for children's pages in the magazine. And this was kind of novel. They were going to dedicate a few pages to have like a kids section, basically. And just in time for Valentine's Day, she illustrates these little cut and paste Valentines that children could make, and they have these little flaps that you can fold over and then paste back down and make these little hinged opening and closing Valentines, and they're very cute. Elmer returns from the war that year too, in 1919, and they get married. They have this very simple wedding with their closest friends in attendance in New York City, July 14th, 1919.
So they're separated from their parents pretty firmly at this point, are they?
Yeah. When Berta moves out west to New York, she's separated from her parents, and of course, Elmer has been overseas doing this camouflaging work in the war. Yeah, they're no
They just seem
longer with
quite
their
detached from their like family is just what I noticed in breezing through all this. Like not in a mean way. It just seems that their friends kind of became their family.
Yeah, I think for sure. They really went and both kind of, did this, we're going to do this bohemian artist life thing. So after they get married, they immediately start looking for a place to live and work. And they start venturing outside of New York City.
Mm.
They go a little bit further and further, and they find the little village of Grandview, and they rent a cottage there. And they like this cliffside of Clausland Mountain because it looks out into the Tappan Zee Bay and kind of reminds them of
It's
telegraph.
very idyllic. If you're listening along at home and you're not from this area, just give a Google to like Tappan Zee Bridge, Grandview. It's it's a very beautiful view, but I would say it's not an ocean view. It's very much a river view, which is its own thing. I don't know how to explain it. And you're looking out towards Westchester, which has its own rolling mountains. So it's the river, it's the bridge, it's the mountains on the other side of the river. There's not huge boats, I think, even at that time coming down. It's mostly pleasure boats. So you see a lot of sails in the summer. It's very frozen in time in some
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, definitely. Cute little Tarrytown across the river there, kind of the hills of Westchester.
Probably good to point out that next to Tarrytown is the town of Sleepy Hollow, which you may know from Washington Irving's very famous Headless Horseman story. That's the area that we're talking about.
Yeah, so another literary connection there,
Yeah.
right? So at this cottage in Grandview, the first few years of their marriage have a very simple routine. People really thrive on structure, and that's what it seems like they had. And when you're an artist, I think it's probably best to have kind of a pace to life like that. Thursdays, they went into New York City to seek out job commissions. Fridays, they kind of got the cottage ready to prepare for the weekend because they always have friends coming over. So that's kind of the day they do all the cleaning and spiffing up of the house. The weekends, their friends are there, they're visiting. They love to do these very stereotypical artist things. They have these little, they put on little tableaus and plays, and they read poetry, and they sketch together and do things like that. They have these communal meals. Berta is apparently a very good cook. So that's their lives on the weekends, are hanging out with their artist pals.
Sounds awesome. Sign me up.
Yeah, I know. It's a very nice routine. After the busy weekend, Mondays they go out and they start looking for spots for a house or a house in general. So Monday's kind of the real estate day, and they're kind of looking in and around Grandview because they really do like the area. Tuesdays and Wednesdays, those are the real work days. That's when they're taking those commissions that they found last Thursday and putting the final touches on them. And then the cycle repeats on Thursdays. They drop off these commissions in New York City, and then they pick up they look for their next assignments.
Sounds more like a modern work from home consulting kind of lifestyle. Things don't change as much as we think they do sometimes.
Yeah, it is. They're doing this commute to New York City and doing the whole work from home thing, and that's going to play majorly into how they're going to their work routine, and we'll see a little bit about that in a few minutes. So they're in this routine of illustration jobs, and that's mostly for magazines. They specialize in story illustrations, and they're still mostly focusing on these kids sections of these magazines. And they do a lot of cutout doll works, illustration, things like that. And that's the routine for the next few years, until 1921, when they welcome baby Hamilton Hader. There's another good
Hamilton Hader. He wouldn't be alone now.
Yeah. So Hamilton is born on March 8th in 1921. It was a difficult birth, though, and it took Berta many weeks to recover. And the midwife said she's probably never going to be able to have any more children. Mm. So Hammy he's kind of fawned over by this group of artists, and for a while he's really the only young child in this circle of friends that they have. So, everyone's kind of spoiling him and they love to spend time. Right? Yeah. they started his artistic career off early. They hand him things to sketch with, and make little pieces of art, and they display these in the cottage there. But tragically, right after his second birthday, Hamilton, he takes ill. He dies of spinal meningitis in May of 1923. Their friend Bessie Beatty has this house up in Maine, and she says, "Hey, go up there, take a few months, in the quiet, get away from everything for a while." They accept this offer, and they're kind of up there in Maine, and they do a couple months of grieving, a little bit of painting and work, but it must have been great to kind of have that support from a friend and have that there. So they it's unfortunate circumstances, but they were lucky to have this support system there for when a bad situation like this did happen.
I think it's so interesting because back then that did count as therapy. Like going away was considered how you dealt with things, right? Like if you were sick, you would go to the seaside because the air was supposed to be better if you were ill. We had all these like sanatoriums for people who had TB. There was this real theory of like, just send people somewhere else and things will get fixed somehow.
Yeah, it was kind of this, well, maybe a change of scenery will help. I think it does. They never. It's very interesting. Of course, they're going to become these illustrators for children. They clearly enjoy doing it, but they're not necessarily. I didn't see anything that really made them see that they were very close to other children. They didn't always do a lot of speaking or public appearances for children. And I kind of wonder if the loss of their child impacted that in some way.
It certainly might have, but I think of other pretty famous children's authors who really didn't like kids very much. Roald Dahl comes to mind. He really was kind of infamous for not being a big fan of kids. I think he writes children as rather mean-spirited, awful people, so maybe that comes through. But I think, there's a lot of people who write children's books for themselves in a lot of ways, for their inner child, not to be like kind of woo-woo about it, but I think a lot of people write stuff for kids because that's what speaks to them, not necessarily because they're like big children fans. I mean, obviously lots of children authors are, but like so many authors who write for adults ultimately will write a book for kids,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of compelling reasons why people are drawn to that have very little things to do with being interested in children.
Dynamic where they no longer have any children, but they are really going to pick up with this illustration for children's storybooks. So starting in the mid-1920s, they start to move away from the children's segments of the magazines and into books. And that's where the big chunk of our story is going to revolve around today. So the books. We'll talk about a couple of them here. Obviously, you mentioned they basically worked on either illustrating or doing the words and illustrations for more than 70 children's books. So we can't cover them all. We'll do some of the big ones and some of the major ones as we go. So in the early 1920s, the publisher Macmillan is looking to release a series of children's books in a line called the Happy Hour series. And I guess that's Happy Story Hour, not necessarily.
I'm guessing that term came to mean that later.
Yeah. These children are not it's prohibition still, I think. So they're not going down to the bar. And
I mean, the drinking ages back then, they could have been.
Yeah. So basically, it's these books designed for story time, with the kids, and there are storybooks for kids, but Macmillan is really looking to dedicate a whole arm of their publishing branch towards this. And this is something kind of new. There wasn't an industry set up around children's publishing quite yet. Really the first time a publisher says, okay, we're going to have a specific division and, these specific kind of lines like this Happy Story Hour line of books.
Like the formation of suburban life starting to take place at this time, and people having this idea of childhood in a stronger conceptual way. The whole idea of childhood is like a fascinating history, but it's changed so significantly over time and how we perceive children. I mean, I talked about this with Dana in one of our earlier podcasts, but the whole concept of teen, like YA fiction, is so new because our concept of what teenagehood is really forms in the 50s and 60s. The idea of the adolescent is like a relatively new thing. Obviously, we knew the time period existed in people's lives, but seeing teenagers as like a distinct age group that had different ways of dealing with things an adult or a child is relatively new. So that it doesn't surprise me that much. That wasn't a thing yet.
Yeah, and these publishers, they recognize, hey, there's this whole market out here, and let's cater to that. So this head of the children's department there, this kind of new division, is Louise Seaman, and she held this competition to help select artists for this series of books that they want to do. So Berta and Elmer, they work on a set of illustrations for classic story, The Ugly Duckling, and they win this competition. In our main source for today, Berta and Elmer Hader, A Lifetime of Art, there's this quote from Louise Seaman, this head of this publishing division, and she describes the illustrations that they made together, that they stood out from all the rest of the artist's samples. It was so simple, so childish, so funny. The colors were so clear and bright. The ducks were well drawn. The layout was artistic without being arty. So I think Berta's graphic experience and design in the newspaper layout definitely helped them here. There's this eye for setting the scene, right? It's not just any old illustration of this ugly duckling. It's, well, how do we frame and graphically set this up? So I think, all the publishing people really appreciate this background that especially Berta has in this, this eye for layout.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that children's books get illustrated, and I would classify theirs as almost fine art. There's there's a look of detail to them that I don't think you always find in children's illustration. It's not oversimplified at all. And I can see why they talked positively about the colors. I hate to go on about a visual medium on a podcast.
I mean, that was going to be my next, question for you. Can you help paint us a picture, for all the folks listening out there? How would you describe them?
I would say, imagine a New Yorker comic with like probably one level more of detail, and then add in beautiful color wash. I mean, they really, really do beautiful color work, but it is closer to fine art than if you're picturing cartoon. It's not that at all. They don't do really cartoony drawings. Some of the figures sometimes can be a little cartoonish, but they're really much more like fine art paintings, sketching. They look like some of the animal drawings remind me of like some of the Audubon illustrations that you'll find of birds. Very detailed, very accurate. Definitely concerned with accuracy more than cartooning, I would say, even in the more cartoonish illustrations. The way they draw themselves is particularly cartoony. That's probably the most cartoony that they get, which is the cover of this book. There's a whole little bit in here of how they draw themselves, which is very sweet. And those are the ones that are closer to New Yorker comics. I think that's what caught my eye. But yeah, I would say the illustrations are not particularly simple. I think simple is kind of a underestimation of their art style. They really went for something a little more complex than that. Their Christmas cards can get like a little bit cartoonish, I suppose. They have those at the end because they design their own Christmas cards. Honestly, I mean, for obvious reasons, but a lot of the paintings that they did of the area, those who don't know, Edward Hopper is from is from Nyack as well. And there's a very Hopperish quality because obviously Hopper was doing the similar kind of landscapes. So their subjects are the same, but it's that very beautiful marriage of realistic and then just a touch of impressionism that I think you get in this era of art, where we're not really in anywhere near the impressionist era anymore. But people who didn't go for surrealism kind of start drawing back towards a realistic perspective, but are no longer concerned with photorealism in the same way. So you get kind of a mixture of that looser style. I don't know if that helped.
Oh, yeah, it did a lot. And I would agree. It's definitely this combination of, you can tell they both have this fine art background, but they're also great because they worked in that illustrating world. And everything is clear with the color and pretty bold. And you're right. It's not that the scenes are simple, but you can get what's happening immediately.
Yeah.
So the illustrations are very, very clear. So at first, they do these illustrations for other authors' stories. And eventually, they start coming up with their own stories that they wrote and illustrated together. And that's kind of the other part of this story. These books and illustrations are really a collaboration. They're both working in tandem on these things, passing sketches back and forth, coming up with the words, and if there's any dialogue, that together. 1936, our local newspaper, the Journal News, prints this article where both of them were speaking to the Women's Civic League of Nyack, and they actually talked about their book making process. And here's a quote from the paper. "They developed their own method of making books," Mr. Hader said. "The story is suggested by," and this is quoting Elmer now, "either by Berta or myself, if I am lucky enough to have an idea," end quote. Then a blank book is taken after the chapters have been discussed, and thought sketches, pencil sketches, are made. Following this, the sketches are colored with watercolors so that not too much is left to the imagination of the editor to whom the book will be submitted. Sometimes the published book follows the dummy closely, sometimes changes are made at the editor's suggestion. Research for work for each story is necessary. Mr. Hader spoke twice of his gratitude, to which they both feel, to Miss Helen Powell, librarian of the Nyack Library, for the assistance which she has given them in finding the volumes necessary for this research.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, there's a nice librarian. Yeah, nice librarian. Shout out there. So the article continues. The Haders use models very little for their sketches. Mrs. Hader said one reason is that it is rare to find a child that makes a good model. A neighbor's little boy makes an excellent model, entering imaginatively into the scene they wish to sketch. But most children are stiff and self-conscious. They themselves have pets, dogs and cats, which they use as models, and they use neighbors' pets as model. For stories dealing with elephants and lions, they go to the zoo. Sketching in the zoo, however, has its drawbacks, Mrs. Hader said. For when one takes out sketching materials and begins drawing a lion, people at the zoo stop looking at the lion and start looking at you. So there's that, nice little quote from the newspaper there. This reporter probably sat in on this little talk that they gave to the Women's Civic League, and so there's kind of some insight into how they were creating these, and everything you read sounds like they're literally sitting in there in the house that they built together.
We don't think mentioned is called Willow Hill.
Yes. Okay. So they're sitting in Willow Hill, and there's this big studio space that they, purpose built there with big windows and lots of light. And they're literally passing back sketches back and forth like that. So these are
beautiful.
Definitely
this married couple be working in such tight collaboration with each other.
Yeah.
I always think about that, what it would be like to work with your spouse day in and day out. And it sounds like there's a lot of positive and negatives, I suppose, but there's something very charming about this couple who spends, it sounds like, almost every waking hour together pretty much.
Yeah. And I think charming is like the perfect word to describe them. I think anyone who seems to have known them or talk about them, they just seem like very friendly, charming people. And that carries over to everything that they do with the book creation and the final product, of course, too. So yeah, altogether, they're basically working on these more than 70 children's books. We can't talk about all of them here, but I do kind of have a list of some of the highlights. And if they are available in the Ramapo Catskill system, we'll let you know, because some of them are available to check out from Ramapo Catskill system. One of the earlier ones that they did was Berta and Elmer Hader's Picture Book of Mother Goose. This was published in 1930. And of course, this is kind of classic Mother Goose tales with all the hallmarks of typical Hader art. Lots of animals, children, that kind of thing. The classic stories, right? This one is available in the Ramapo Catskill system. You can check this one out. The next one was Working Together, the Inside Story of the Hader Books. And this is published in 1937. And this is a book on how they work together, their creative process to working with the editors, and it has these kind of very charming. This one, it does veer into that New Yorker cartoony style,
Right.
where it's almost the caricatures of them.
I
Berta's
like
there with
those the
her
best though. They look
cute
very
frizzy hair, yeah,
yeah,
and Elmer's there with his mustache,
and very big
that's
nose. He gives himself an enormous nose.
yeah,
But
yeah.
they
So
look
these,
so sweet together. They
yeah,
look like they do look like characters in a children's book who are, off on adventures. So sweet.
yeah, and so this is the whole process, from getting the idea to the book going to the bindery, and at the very end, there's an illustration with the Haders. They're kneeling at the foot of their bed, and the text reads, "At night, we pray that mothers and fathers and librarians and booksellers and boys and girls will like our books." And that's kind
Oh,
of how the book closes. So that's the very end of the bookmaking process. Cock-a-doodle-doo is the next kind of one of their first real bigger moments. This one was published in 1940, and they were runners-up for the Caldecott Award that year. And this one, we follow this little baby chick who has been separated from his family and all the kind of adventures that this little baby chick has to. And that was, again, that was nominated for the Caldecott. Another one was shortly right after that was Little Town. And this was published in 1941. And it gives us a view into the daily activities of a small town, kind of like Nyack. It follows us around. And I think this would have been very appealing to kids because it follows the things that they would have seen, their parents, the adults, and the other kids doing around town, going to the bank, doing their shopping, the routine of the milkman and the mail carrier. Again, this town is very heavily inspired by Nyack when you look at the illustrations from this one. This is available in the Ramapo Catskill library system. The Little Stone House, and this was published in 1944, and this is them building Willow Hill. It's got these great illustrations showing these working parties where they're clearing the land in Grandview, doing the foundation and the stonework together, again, building raising these big beams across the roof.
and I cannot imagine how this happened because if you've never seen this plot of land, it's like vertical. I have no idea how, like, with just like some friends, they built this place. Unbelievable.
I think it was definitely a long process, and I think the friends were eager to help because they kind of knew the hospitality that they were going to enjoy and all the wonderful weekends that they were going to spend up there. So
Right? They
you
were
kind of
building
see
it for themselves.
yeah, yeah.
Right?
It's it's a lot of sweat equity to get into this it's kind of this little
This Airbnb.
clubhouse that yeah, exactly. And okay, so now we're going to arrive at the big one, and that's the Big Snow. And this one is published in 1948, and it won the Caldecott Medal. And we'll go over here because we've mentioned it, but I don't think we talked about it. The Caldecott Medal is awarded by the Association for Library Services to Children. It's a branch of the ALA, the American Library Association, and it's for the most distinguished American picture book for children in the preceding year. And it's been awarded each year since 1938. The Big Snow was directly inspired by real life events. In 1947, there's this huge blizzard across the Northeast, and the Big Snow tells the tale of the Haders. They're all these animals. They have this animal intuition. They know it's going to be a bad winter and a big snow, and they're kind of preparing for it. We see them. We see the squirrels gathering up the nuts, and the most of the geese and the birds flying south and migrating. But there's this giant snowstorm that hits the area, and the Haders, they help all their animal friends by putting out seeds and little pieces of bread, and helps the animals survive this kind of really this huge blizzard. And this is inspired by a real life story. Basically, at another one of these talks that they did for one of these civic groups, Elmer mentioned that they heard a report from the Audubon Society. It was asking people to put out little scraps of food and seeds for the birds outside after this big blizzard. And that's kind of where this idea came from. So it's this very typical story that they do. The theme is helping others, compassion, again, hallmarks, these animal pictures that are, just beautiful detail in the feathers and the fur on these animals and everything. So it's a very Berta and Elmer story.
Available on Overdrive as well. So if you're an ebook person in our area, you can get it on Overdrive, the Big Snow.
Yep, and of course in print in the Ramapo Catskill system too.
The reason we're saying Ramapo Catskill system, by the way, is because during the renovation, our personal library has winnowed down to the bare bones. We don't have cool backdated children's books available at our library, but in the system as a whole, we could place holds for you.
Yeah, so these ones are this one is the big one, and it's probably the most readily available.
You can go on our YouTube channel and listen to Brian Jennings read it to you.
Oh yeah, there you go. Okay,
Brian read it very early on in COVID, so it's one of our read-alongs on our story time from home list. So if you want to hear a dad of 3 read a children's book to you, it's very enjoyable.
Oh yeah, that's good call, remembering that one.
I just pulled that back my hind brain because it was probably about 2.5 years ago now. It was one of the first videos Brian did, I think.
Great. So thank you for that plug, because so you can experience that one online too as well. So a couple other ones that we're going to mention here too. Two's Company, Three's a Crowd, A Wild Goose Tale. And this was their last published children's book. And this was released in 1965. And it's this story of this whole flock of migrating geese, and they kind of descend upon this farm. And it's this typical, humans helping animals kindness story that we get from them. And this really caps off their 30-year career producing children's books. And one other one that I thought was really interesting because it has this other kind of a local bend to it. But I can't find too much on this one, or if there was a high, I don't think it was very high highly printed book or reprinted book. And that is High Tour, The History of a Mountain. And this was published in 1942. And it is mentioned in our main source from today, Berta and Elmer Hader, A Lifetime of Art. And we'll, of course, do the plug for that one at the end, too. And I think I found mention of this one in a journal news article from that year, 1942. And it was read to the children of the street school in December of 1942. So
hey,
right here in New City
now in the Street Community Center.
Yeah. And the guest reader for that day was Mary Mowbray Clark of Dutch Gardens fame, and kind of another one of these local artsy folks who was very much involved in that circle of Rockland County artists. And Maxwell Anderson was also in attendance for that one too. So again, some of our local Rocklandy people from our artist community here in the county.
Yeah, they were drawn in through Nyack, but they wound up living throughout the county in little pockets. So we have all these interesting, there's roads in Clarkstown that are known for being like artists communities, where 10 or 20 people would have lived at one point and had little small artist bungalow colonies. Really fascinating pockets of art around here. The spillover from Manhattan can never be overemphasized. It certainly hits Westchester harder, but we have it too. It's really interesting. And these people going out like the Haders did to find a quieter place on the weekends. In fact, we just had a guest lecture where they zoomed in from Jackson Pollock's house, because the Pollocks did that, but they went out onto Long Island. So they just went in a different direction. But you have this spread out from the city of artists as they get a little older and no longer want to live in the hubbub, and they're seeking a quieter life. And it's really interesting for us. It really makes Rockland this really rich history of the rural, the artistic, the growth of suburbia, bedroom community. It's a cool mix.
Yeah, so they're all these artists that we've just mentioned are also part of all of that. And at this point in the 40s, High Tour Mountain there in New City and Havistraw has not been added to part of the Palisades Interstate Park system. And the Haders, we'll talk about some more of their community activism, and Maxwell Anderson, of course. There's this big push to make it a park and not have it basically developed or turned into a rock quarry.
Yes, it has happened to several mountains in our area that are no longer, because they've been rock quarried out of existence.
Yeah. So this book was published in 1942, but I can't find too much about it. So that's something that I want to keep on looking into, because it obviously has this very local bend and this theme of preservation.
I'm curious, maybe I should send you this link then to the LIU Post Library with their special collection. Maybe they have it because they're actively trying to find first editions of every single book. Now, obviously, they're concentrated on the juvenilia, not the juvenilia, the juvenile collection. Clarification. Juvenilia is the product of famous people when they are children, not stuff for children. Sorry, but their juvenile collection. But it's popular stuff there.
Okay, we'll have to look in to see if maybe they have a copy over there.
Yeah.
So we're going to kind of switch gears here because this other aspect of their lives was this community activism. And they are deeply involved in the community. Elmer became the zoning administrator of Grandview around 1926 or 27. The sources vary a little bit. And he held the post right around till 1969 or 70. Again, the sources vary. I think it might have been because, you were nominated and then you officially left the position. So I think that's why the dates kind of vary. Mm-hmm. He never took a salary for this position in Grandview. And basically what he did was, he just really sought to enforce the village code so it could keep that kind of river town character that we more or less know that it has today. He was really well known for, if you wanted to modify your house or maybe tack on a garage or, he was willing to work with people to say, hey, yeah, you can do that, but let's try to, maybe not disrupt. We won't, bulldoze too many trees or make the garage, we'll make it blend in with the rest of the house, right? We don't want these, we don't want anything too gaudy or things that will change really the look and feel of our nice little river village.
And I think he and many other people worked hard on that because if you drive through that area, even though these houses are sometimes truly enormous, they're very disguised by the tree line. Which is why famous people have quite famously liked to live up in Grandview and Sneed's Landing in these little areas because the houses are quite tucked away from the road and are very hidden, despite when you do see them. If you go on Zillow now, you can cheat and find them. They are enormous homes, but they are really disguised by the tree lines of in the mountains. Bill Murray lived up there at one point. Lots of A-listers like that area if they want to live near Manhattan, have a house near Manhattan, because you really cannot see them almost at all.
Yeah. So, partially because of Elmer's work, we still have Grandview with this very characteristic, where we have the house styles, usually not too drastic or gaudy. They've maintained a lot of their historic looks most of the time, or at least the historic theme. And so he really helped preserve that. They did try to fight the Tappan Zee Bridge coming across. They thought it was going to disrupt the scenery. Yeah.
Well, not disrupting the scenery. I think it should be clear. It did destroy a good part of the South Nyack village.
Oh yeah.
No longer exists because of the Tappan Zee, essentially.
There's a whole section of town that was basically wiped out because of that.
It's gone now, or is it South Nyack is totally dissolved now, right? Officially?
Yes, South Nyack is no longer a separate village. They are part of the town of Orangetown now.
And that was relatively recent. They held on for a really long time before officially dissolving. But that Tappan Zee Bridge fight was really ugly. People were very angry.
Yeah. And you see why, because it really did open up in the 50s. It really did open up the rest of the county. It wasn't as secluded anymore. And that's when we saw the real big wave of suburbanization here in the county. So people were worried, well, this is going to be an eyesore, but it's also, we have this little almost secret
enclave.
Enclaves here in Rockland that are in the country. And that's going to be opened up to a lot more folks now. So they were successful, though, in blocking something that would have probably been even more destructive. And that was, there was a plan to link up the New Jersey Turnpike, have it cut through Piermont, Grandview, and South Nyack, and link up with the big traffic loop for the Tappan Zee Bridge.
Oh, God, could you imagine?
And that basically would have
traffic hell. Oh, no.
Completely destroyed the entire character of all those river villages. And, today that obviously didn't happen, and we have the nice village there, and a lot of that is because of the work of the people like the Haders, who were very interested in basically buying up the whole Palisades Interstate Park idea and supporting that, hey, let's devote money to these public parks and kind of preserve that skyline of the river there. So they were involved with that, and that was successful because obviously we still have these, very pretty, very scenic river villages along today, and the turnpike not like cutting right through and completely. That would have, I think, destroyed the character of basically all those river towns there.
Yeah, which has been pretty impressive. They've been able to maintain. There's not a lot of chains in Nyack still to this day. There's a Starbucks.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, there's a Walgreens now, but you still have the little family-run pharmacy, things like that. Yeah, exactly. So that there is kind of this idea that we're going to try and maintain our little mom and pop shops a lot of the time.
We got a little bookstore. Pickwick is still there walking around. Yeah, things that you don't really find in a lot of other places. I would say the most similar town to Nyack still along the Hudson's probably Warwick, has maintained a lot of that as well. But it's an interesting time out of time kind of place because of that.
Yeah. And all that classic architecture and scenery that's preserved because of folks like the Haders being so involved.
Too, I should say. Piermont probably more so than Nyack. They were closer to Piermont.
And so that's basically what they did until the 1960s, was produce these children's books from the 30s to the 60s. And the publishing market did change, and they were getting older too. So they kind of said, well, hey, you know what? We've done this for a 30-year career or anything is pretty long time. So they did retire. They both continued to paint. They did a lot of traveling. They liked to go up to upstate and to New England. And you mentioned before they would do these charming little Christmas cards for their friends every year and send them off. And it's nice now because you're not working on deadlines. Although I really think they reveled in that pace and that scheduling of the publishing world and like that whole process. But now, of course, they can make art for themselves, right? You're not making it. You're doing it because you really love it. Not that they didn't enjoy making the children's stories. But they can kind of, there's no one coming to you saying, well, here, you've got to do, this Mother Goose rhyme story. You can do landscape, you can do portraits, you can do whatever you like. Free to create. They slowed down in their later years. And in the last few weeks of his life, Elmer had to go into a nursing home. But Berta was constantly at his side there. He passes away in 1973. And on the day he passes away, Berta asks him what he was thinking about. It's kind of this quiet moment. She breaks the silence and she asks him, well, what are you thinking about? And he just says that I've been so damn lucky. So that's like, very, again, like charming right to the very end. She keeps on living at Willow Hill until the last few weeks of her life. And then she went to go live with her, one of her nephews and his wife. And in a letter she wrote, a few days before she passed away in 1976, she wrote that, this experience with the nephew and his wife, and she said she was in heaven already. So, just very charming people all the way to the very end. They have this legacy of these books that are still in print. The Big Snow has gone through more than 40 printings over the years. It's been translated into 11 different languages along the way. To loop back to where we started, in the year 2000, the eventual owner of Willow Hill, Thomas Mazziotti, he was granted a Historic Preservation Merit Award by the Historical Society of Rockland County. He did a lot of major restoration work on the house, kept it largely in the character and frame that it was originally, just kind of doing some modernizations. In 2002, it was purchased by another family who did major renovations and really expanded on it. They kept the sandstone fairy tale whimsical theme, but they turned that dial up pretty high, if you ask me. They really did expand it.
Yeah, it's hard if a house doesn't have historical preservation status to force people to maintain it. And it's actually quite difficult to get that status, as I'm sure you know. It's not an easy application process.
It's still there. It's just a lot different than how a lot of people in the county remembered it from years past. So yeah, you can still drive by, and if you ever take a drive down River Road, so many beautiful and historic houses there, and their house is one of them. So I think we'll wrap up today. I do want to mention our main source for today's talk. We did use some of our local newspapers, but our main source today was Berta and Elmer Hader, A Lifetime of Art. And this was the collaboration of 4 researchers, Joy Horner-Rich, Joy Horner-Rich, Karen Tolley, and John and Judy Waller. And this one is a wonderfully researched book, and it's readily available in the Ramapo Catskill Library System. Joy Horner-Rich is a niece of the Haders, and in 2008, she created the Hader Connection Limited, and that's a nonprofit dedicated to promoting the Haders' legacy. Karen Tolley is the head of the Hader Connection and wrote the text for A Lifetime of Art. And John and Judy Waller are like the Haders, and they are a husband and wife duo, but they do it for college science textbooks. So this is, I'm sure, much more fun project than diagramming of science textbooks. They did a lot of the scanning of the artwork, the photography, and a lot of the layout work too. So that's, we definitely covered a lot today. Berta and Elmer Hader, A Lifetime of Art, because there was so many aspects of the story that we just didn't have time to cover in.
Well, we can't convey
podcast.
Artwork.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we can describe it to you.
If you want to see their art, that's the way to see it, which I would highly recommend. It is charming stuff. It is beautiful. It is a really good capture, not only of the views, but they did a lot about the local flora and fauna. So you can see a lot of the chipmunk that I'm seeing skittering across my patio as we speak. You can see all sorts of visitors that they were interested in. I think it's really well worth your while. I'll say thank you so much, Joe, for bringing your expertise to us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Wow, my pleasure. You'll definitely have to come back because I like the format changes that we have with different hosts that bring different things to the table. And I think this is really, I feel like I got to hear a story, which was really nice. And I really appreciate it. And thank you so much, Joe. And to everybody else, thanks for listening, and read on.